of the West Sacramento City Council, Redevelopment Successor Agency, and Financing Authority. We're going to begin tonight, as we do each week, with the Pledge of Allegiance. So we'd like to invite our guests to join the council and staff in the pledge, which tonight's going to be led by Andrew Sternfeld of Assemble Sacramento.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The council did meet in closed session this evening to confer with our legal counsel regarding one item of existing litigation, River City Landholding LLC versus Yolo County, and one item of substantial exposure litigation, and no action was taken. With that, we're going to proceed to item 1A, which is presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda, but within the jurisdiction of the City Council. As is noted on our agenda documents, under items brought up under this agenda item cannot be discussed or acted upon by the City Council pursuant to state law, but it is an important opportunity for a public forum. We do ask that anyone wishing to address the council on this or any other agenda item this evening to please fill out one of the yellow cards that's available near the front door and to turn the card into the city clerk. In front of the clerk is a timer that we use to make sure that everyone gets a chance to be heard, and to that end we ask that all comments be limited to no more than 3 minutes. Also in front of the clerk is a flip chart that simply indicates which agenda item the council is currently considering. The clerk takes the yellow cards all the way up to the conclusion of the staff report on any particular agenda item. And once the public comment or the council questions or discussion has begun, we don't take any additional speaking requests. So if you're here for a particular item, please be sure to get the request card into the city clerk prior to the conclusion of the staff report. We also recognize that for some folks, speaking in public can cause some anxiety and be uncomfortable. So we do try to maintain a civil discourse in the chamber, and so that we ask that there not be any boos or cat calls or actually even any applause or other demonstrations in order to put everyone at ease who has an opportunity to come and petition their government and weigh in on the important issues facing our city. So with that, we're going to proceed to item to 1A. We have a couple of requests to speak. The first is by Paulette Quam. Paulette, there's a button at your right hand. There. So you don't have to yell up to the microphone. There we go.
This is cool. Why didn't you tell me this last time? You probably didn't have it.
No, we've had it that for 15 years.
Well, it's been about that long. Anyway, thank you, Mayor and fellow council members. And Bill, I can feel you here, even though you're not. Christopher, I'm going to address my concerns to you. As many of you others weren't here many years ago, I had come to council regarding the safety concerns on West Linden. Cars into the trees on the median, into kitchens of homes along Linden, and into sidewalks and fences along Linden at that time. It was very fresh. I requested more street lighting and offered to personally pay for stop signs on Linden and Summerfield. The implied crosswalk was painted black, and I was called and told the traffic didn't warrant a four-way stop. Not enough cars. You talked to the city regarding lights, and then told me that PG&E would move the light, the street light, on Linden and Summerfield closer to the corner. It's never been done. You said that there was not lighting and wiring for more street lights along the park or the school side, and they couldn't do anything about it, but they would move the street light at that corner. It's still very dark, very dangerous, and no crosswalks, except for in front of the school now. I realize that we have no Melrose, we have no HOAs or anything, but other areas in town that don't have it also have had some improvements done that we haven't had done. Southport Elementary School bus service was stopped after that, and so now we're leaving traffic jam of parents dropping off and picking up children and others sharing the roads. Later nights, Linden is a speedway, not a residential street. I don't know what the answer is, but I really think that people should concentrate on coming to our side and trying to do a little bit on West Linden for lighting and traffic control and safety of the residents that have been out there for many, many years. And in closing, I would like to point out that we have concerns regarding health issues to wildlife and people, and that our lake or pond has been dry the last 2 years and no action has been taken, whether it's the Lake Association that put in a pump that failed.
Paulette, I do have to ask you to come to a conclusion.
Yeah.
Your time's up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't even hear it.
No, it's all
Anyway,
right.
thank you.
Thanks. All right, and Jim Cody?
Hi. Thank you for this chance. I was here last week when they were talking with Caltrans, and my issue is similar to Paulette's regarding Linden. It's a U-shape from Linden. There's Linden North and Linden South. It makes a big U-shape, and it's 2 lanes in each direction. And I understand they're going to narrow that down to 1 lane in each direction, and just stripe the right-hand lanes and push. We'll have 2 lanes going in each direction instead of 1 lane going in each direction instead of 2 going in each direction. And the idea is because they want to widen it for bicycles, and we don't have that many bikers out there to really warrant giving up 2 lanes of a lane of traffic. And in the morning and again in the afternoon at 3:15 when they're picking up their children from Southport Elementary, the traffic is backed up for several hundred yards, and that's with people able to pass on the left. If that's closed off, there's no place to pass. You're just going to be stopped in the same traffic as the parents are stopped in, waiting to get in, go in and pick up your kids and come back out onto Linden and make a U-turn and go back. So that's going to be a problem, and the speeding is a real big time problem with the 4 lanes. I understand 2 lanes or 1 lane may lower that, but it's still a residential area. It's set at 35. It should be set at 30. There is a sign out there posting speed limits, and we went and looked at it one night. 1 car went by at 55, 1 car went by at 62. These are highway speeds in the residential area. As Paulette alluded to, cars have gone into kitchens, cars have gone into backyards, cars have hit trees, and pushing these lanes together and giving up these 2 outside lanes, you're gonna have cars going right almost on head-on to each other is what it amounts to, with a small medium in between. I think it's gonna be an issue, and we definitely need a stop sign at the corner of Summerfield and Linden. We have one at Summerfield, north and south, but we need one at Linden, because that's a blind turn coming around Linden I guess you're heading east out towards Jefferson. That's a blind turn, and you have to look. And if you have only 1 lane to get into, you better get up to speed and hurry, because the guy coming around that corner has nowhere to go but to stop. Now they see you pull out in that right-hand lane, they'll pull over to the left and pass you. But if you've got that narrowed down to 1 lane, there's nowhere to go. They're going to have to stop. And it's only to give up more room for more bikes. And I believe it's going to be a problem. Still, somebody's going to pass you on a Saturday night. Some kid's going to pass you on the right. If you're doing your 30 or 35, you're going to get passed on the right unless there's rumble strips or something there to slow these people down. And now you're giving up the reason for the bikes. Bikes aren't going to ride over rumble strips. So I'm not sure what the answer is. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, those are the only requests we had to speak under item 1A. As I think Mr. Cody mentioned, we did take this issue up at the last meeting with respect to the Linden Road diet, and all of the challenges of the issue were brought up actually in these comments around what we're trying to grapple with in terms of speed reductions and traffic calming. Some of the least effective traffic calming mechanisms are signage and stripes and stop signs, frankly. So they are the cheapest, but they're under conditions where the road engineering and the road geometry is so wide and so open that your mind thinks of it as a speedway. It doesn't matter what we put up in terms of signage. And we've learned that in several places around the city, as well as it being backed up by all the national research about traffic engineering. And it's for the reason for the road diet. The most effective way to change speeds is to narrow the road significantly. And we've certainly learned that as well in my old neighborhood, Mr. Christoph's current neighborhood, along Park Boulevard. Same issues. The road was very wide. It was 4 lanes. And we had massive speeding problems. We still have speeding issues, but nowhere near on the scale that we had before. We aren't permitted to simply set the speed limit at whatever we choose. And on streets where people are consistently speeding, and by large amounts, it violates the state speed trap laws for us to simply reduce the speed limit. So if most drivers are going 30, 36, 37, or 40 or 45, it actually isn't legal for us to set a speed limit of 30. And if we do so, then the courts will not enforce our speeding tickets. And so the challenges around traffic and speeding are mostly about us as drivers, respecting each other's neighborhoods as well as our own, and they're secondarily about the geometry of how we're building the streets in the neighborhoods in the first place. And so that's where the focus is, and it's why the road diet, which is a very much more significant investment than just putting up new speed limit signs, has become the preferred alternative. As I think was noted last week, our staff is working closely with the school district on how to make sure that the road diet matches up best with drop-offs and pickups at the school as well, but that certainly is the key part of the strategy. So I think progress is coming, but the answers they're not easy, but there's also quite a lot of evidence and research in our own experience as a city about the most effective ways to really deal with the challenges that have been brought up, not just tonight, as Paulette said, but for many, many years. Right, so with that, we're at item 1B, which is council communications. Are there reports, are there communications this evening, Mr. Johannesson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I attended the Yolo County Housing Authority meeting on September 14th. There are really no items of significance to report out on that. A lot of administrative updates. On September 13th, I also attended the Yolo County Solano Quality Management District, and the most significant item in that was a discussion of the budget, an overview of the budget. And then yesterday, Mayor Pro Tem Sandine and I attended the Age-Friendly Advisory Committee. This was the second meeting of this advisory committee, and it's actually a very good meeting. We had a presentation from Yolo County Health on a health survey that they had done. And there's actually a working group within Yolo County that I think we have members of our community that are participating, but I don't think there's any official city involved at this point. But that really kind of point out kind of the gaps in transportation or gaps in servicing folks as they age, which is going to be, I think, very useful when we start looking at the plan that's going to be coming out of this committee sometime mid next year. We also received a senior resource directory that's compiled. I think this is through Legal Services. It's basically everything that has to do with senior resources in one list. I'm not sure how that's accessed, and whether you have to have a physical copy of this to get this, but that was good information. And then, as I said, we discussed the planning of the kind of strategy and the timing of how we're going to approach creating this plan for the city on aging and healthy living. That's it.
Other reports? Mr. Ledesma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of committee assignments to report on. First, I'll start with the Yolo Habitat Conservancy. We had a meeting this past Monday, the 19th, and on the agenda were quite a few items, just kind of housekeeping stuff we usually do at these meetings. I did feel it important to start briefing you. Two of the key items we received. First of all, the JPA is still reviewing and starting to come through with proposals for possible staffing models for when the agency goes full-time in implementation, anticipating the completion of the permits next year. It's an exercise. The city manager and I took part in a meeting earlier with, in the month, or I think it was August, actually, with the executive director, Patricia Michon, as well as council member Ferricks from Davis and the city manager from Davis, to start having a collaborative effort on the subcommittee looking at our staffing model. And the recommendations were brought back at this meeting. In short, we're going to look at trying to start this conservancy in a very small way, scalable way. We're going to actually put out to bid, or not to bid, actually, the request other agencies, either the other cities, the county, that they might be able to have letters of interest that maybe they want to take on some of the tasks or administrative tasks or others, functions that will be part of the agency, is a way to make sure we can build upon the strengths of it, as well as we'll be looking at organizations like LAFCO who may be interested in providing shared services or even leadership of that. So again, we're kind of open in terms of how we want to proceed, but what we are sure of is that we need to make sure we kind of keep our momentum around the management of the JPA based on lessons learned, and as well as keeping up on the timelines. As far as that's concerned, we are running still full tilt on preparing for the pre-public review and getting ready for the review of the draft EIS and EIR. The process is becoming a little bit tenuous now, to let everybody know. We've been on the point in terms of providing our agency partners with everything they need. They are just having a harder time these days keeping up with us. It's an important note. We have a very strong relationship with those agencies. They helped us to get to the point we are. We knew the schedule we were on was going to be very, very tight and difficult, but we're coming down to basically the 11th hour. And some new policy issues are popping up here and there. More so as the review of some of the documents we have aren't coming back in a timely manner. I'm not being critical of them, it's just they're facts of how it operates at the state. Chair Provenza Portraya will begin meeting with them on a monthly basis to begin reviewing the workflow, to begin reviewing policy issues in an effort to sort of keep things moving along. It's important because, as you recall, we're looking for a December of 17 timeframe of getting the permits. So we're trying to stay on that schedule and trying not to lose time, because as you know, lost time will result in more budget, and we need to continue to get funding for the burgeoning agency. So those are two main items we have. I also want to point out there was an article that came out over the weekend around the Conservancy. It was not one that brought up any new items that the Conservancy did not know about. In fact, it just rehashed the report issued by the grand jury last month in August. So what I will say is that the JPA, the board, remains very engaged, very action-oriented in how we pursue these permits. We feel, and I'm sure hopefully the council feels the same way, the current staff and the current board are working very hard to get this permit farther than it's ever been in the 20 years this effort has worked on this effort. So it's unfortunate that article had to come out and rehash things that we solved 4 years ago. But it did, and it gives us an opportunity to kind of make sure everybody knows the story of how hard we've worked to make sure that this JPA is an example of good government running at a very, very razor-thin budget that's constantly raising money to fund itself for the planning process, as well as planning for its future, and to have actually a good plan for Yolo County. So I'm very proud of its work and look forward to educating anybody else that's interested in knowing about that agency on the work we've done. On September 12th, it was a brief meeting of the Yolo County Transportation District. Nothing of real consequence to discuss other than the discussion of the new Y shuttle service, which I think you had a briefing on a council meeting I was not at. But we had more discussion around that. Some refinements were made at that time. In fact, it led to the event today. We had today right here across the street where the YCTD had a press briefing about the new Y shuttle service, which will provide service for West Sacramento, for Yolo County, to downtown Sacramento, providing service every 15 minutes, leaving from the transit center, which will be a connecting point for residents, riders from Woodland and Davis. We had a fair amount of press today around it. I want to thank the mayor for coming out and supporting it, but I also want to thank our city staff, who certainly partnered with YCTD on a few things that made this option, the shuttle service for arena events, even better, and that is we were able to work with the city of Sacramento to allow Yellow Bus to actually go through. Sac PD will allow the Yellow Bus to go through streets that they will be closing during the arena to allow the Yellow Bus to get back much more efficiently and faster. It's a huge deal, so I want to thank City Manager Marty Tuttle for and the rest of this team for making that happen. In addition, we know people may be coming down here riding bikes or walking, or if they live nearby, Raleigh Field or here, coming down to catch the shuttle. It's an easy way to get down there. And I think the county staff has arranged to have increased security around to make sure the area is safe as people walk, bike, or come into the transit center. It's a wonderful service. I'm really proud of YCTD of looking forward to getting the shuttle in. And I also thank our partners over at SACOG who got involved to help make sure we got it off to the right launch today, making sure we communicate it well as part of the overall regional plan to make sure our urban core has good, affordable, and kind of fun, convenient transit to the event center in downtown Sacramento. That's all I have for today. Thank you.
Mr. Kristoff.
Yeah, very briefly, Mr. Mayor, a couple items. The Sacramento Regional Sanitation Board, we met last Wednesday, and there was really nothing of any consequence. The only thing we're really concentrating on is continuing the project, the ECHO project for building a new sanitation facility. And then on the last Thursday, West Sacramento Flood Control Agency, the JPA, met, West SAFCA, and it was really a very brief meeting, but I think one important thing that came out of that is, as I have been reporting all along, there's been a number of property owners that we've been in discussion with acquiring their property or acquiring permission to get on their property. And I'm glad to say that we're down to 7 property owners, I think. I think there's only 7 left where we have to purchase property. And some of those, of course, will be contested. We will probably go to court, but we'll give it our best faith effort to get that property and get moving on building the levee that is necessary for adequate flood protection. We have permission to go on those properties and build the levees that are necessary or make the improvements that are necessary. But at the same time, we haven't quite finalized all of the negotiations yet. But we're working on it, and we've had 30 or 40 of them, and now we're down to 7. So we're making progress, doing well.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kristoff. Mayor Pro Tem Sandine?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On September 3rd, the Regional Water Authority met, and that agency is working on their integrated regional water management plan and also a planning grant to help support that effort moving forward. It does not actually involve us, even though we're part of the Regional Water Authority, but many other agencies in that authority are under the integrated regional water management plan. And as you know, we're taking up our urban water management plan during the agenda this evening. September 12th, the city school 2x2 met, and we heard about the Bright Park Phase 3 grant grant possibility and the need for an agreement or for the school district to extend site control for 30 years in order for us to move that grant request forward. And so the school board trustees will be working on that. We also received updates on school site needs related to development projects. So just looking forward, kind of for their best planning purposes, what we're doing and what the school district needs to be thinking about. I don't know if you have anything else to add, but I can leave that to you, Mr. Mayor, since we were both there. September 19th, the Water Resources Association of Yolo County Board met, and we received an update on the progress of the development of our sustainable groundwater management plan. And our county's work is proceeding smoothly, and it appears that the Water Resources Association will actually be replaced by the Yolo Groundwater Sustainability Agency over time. So that's in our future as well, and I think that's also referenced in our urban water management plan as well. And then finally, Mr. Johannesson mentioned our age-friendly advisory committee meeting yesterday. We're actually going to be accelerating the meeting, the work of that committee will be meeting every month and doing a lot of outreach, and so to keep on the path of finishing up by June of 2017. But there's a lot of work ahead of us and a lot of outreach that will be done. But as Mr. Tennyson said, we received really substantial reports yesterday to kind of get us rolling. And then finally, I participated in the Metro Chamber Study Mission in St. Paul, Minneapolis last week, and I chaired and moderated a session on the importance of regional mobility. Our city manager also attended and chaired a session on embracing your city's identity. And the overall lessons from our region from that study mission were inclusiveness in transit, historic preservation and reuse, and also incredibly collaborative region. There is a really good Business Journal story, I think, that came out today on the study mission. It was published today, so it's a good read. And I also attended a dinner at the barn that was put on by the Center for Land-Based Learning along with a number of the council members. And the funds were raised that evening at that event that actually will allow for the building of the urban farm that's adjacent to the barn. So that was another exciting day in the city of West Sacramento. Thank you.
Thank you. Just if we're talking about barn events, we also we're also the host for the California Craft Beer Summit Forum, and we also had the chance to keynote the statewide Craft Beer Summit, which, according to Aaron Laurel, it was a big coup for the city of West Sacramento to be keynoting the statewide event. A lot of brewers interested in what's going on here as a model, but also several of them said that they would like to open their next location in West Sacramento, so a very successful economic development activity as well. We also hosted the very first TEDx event in the region was here at the barn on Saturday evening, and I presented on our work on digital badging and the College Promise. And, but of course was upstaged by Leah Nelson from Because I Care, who was fantastic as well, but a really great program. And I think it was that and the craft beer event were the two first non-party events at the barn, and both very well attended, and the TEDx event in particular very successful. So the barn's definitely taken off. I've been invited to join, and we had our first meeting today of the steering committee for the Alliance for Sustainable Cities. This is an initiative that grew out of the Paris talks on climate last year. Council may recall, I didn't go, but there were 500 mayors from around the world that participated, along with the state of California. The mayors and California together were the sleeper hits of the whole Paris climate accords, because that's where all the action has been happening, is in California and in cities across the world, in particular in the United States. But out of that effort, this Alliance for Sustainable Cities has emerged, which is a public-private partnership between a handful of mayors in their cities and a wide variety of private sector partners to deliver on investment grade climate change activities, both resilience and dealing with climate change, but also in reducing climate emissions. So the cities are Santa Fe, Baltimore, New York City, Des Moines, Iowa, Salt Lake City, Austin, and West Sacramento. And we're joined by JP Morgan Chase and AECOM and several investor-owned utilities and many others. So we're expecting some significant investment opportunities to emerge from this for demonstration projects, pilot projects, and just big big climate-related projects in those cities, including ours. So it was a I just don't know why we were asked to, I mean, we've done a lot of work in this sector, but we're not New York City and Baltimore and Des Moines, so we'll see, but it was good to see that our work here has been recognized nationally. Last Friday was the demo day for the Startups and Residents program that we in San Francisco and San Leandro and Oakland are jointly delivering. It's a one-of-a-kind program in the country where the 4 cities are blurring the lines between startups and government, and incubating and hosting startups inside city departments to build applications that will improve the efficiency, the responsiveness, the effectiveness of city programs and services. Council is well aware of this. We're the host of 3 of these startups that are, 2 of which are working in police and one with the police department, and one of which is working with the fire department. And so they and all the other startups that are in the program presented on Friday some of their initial work, including our staff from Mark Sawyer now I'm going to forget everybody, so I forget I said Mark Sawyer. Staff from police and fire both all presented on Friday. They were some of the big hits of the event. I had the opportunity to keynote it. I think Mr. Johannes and Mr. Ledesma are both giving speeches or presentations about the program in the coming weeks. So this has turned out to be it's certainly a good marketing effort for us to be able to plant yet another flag that West Sacramento is open for business, but also a strong entrepreneurial, innovative city. But also, in terms of just building good products to improve our ability to respond to police incidents and to serve, to better connect homeless individuals with services, and for incidents response. So it's a positive step. And then finally, at SACOG, today we announced the appointment of our new CEO for SACOG. This is to replace Mike McKeever, who has been our CEO since Marty Tuttle. So we had 2 nationally recognized change-making CEOs in a row over the last decade plus, or 15 years, and the board had set a very high bar for what we wanted to be. SACOG is widely seen as one of the top 3 metropolitan planning organizations in the country, and as a major driver of change and action and progress, both in our region and statewide, and we didn't want to let up. So we were very aggressive in the search, and we found the candidate that we wanted very much, and the board is very enthusiastic about his appointment. So today we announced James Corliss, who is the head of Transportation for America, is going to be the new CEO of SACOG. He has experience at MTC in the Bay Area. He was a long time ago with the Surface Transportation Project, which was a smart growth, land use and planning, transportation planning nonprofit organization here in California, but very widely known and respected across the country, and is right in the lane of what we're trying to accomplish here in West Sacramento. So it will help keep the region's focus along the same policy priorities and funding and investment priorities that we have here in the city. So we're very excited about it. Also at SACOG, we're trying to conclude the negotiations on the bike share operator. I reported a month ago that we had selected one. It's now public who we're negotiating with. It's an outfit called Social Bicycles. There are about a dozen bike share operators active in the world, and we interviewed and did some test bike rides with the 3 of them, and selected Social Bicycles as the target for our negotiation. The bikes are smart bikes, so the technology and the equipment is on the bike, not at the dock. And that has lots of implications about things that you can do that you couldn't do with the systems that many of us have ridden in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere, including creating essentially temporary dock areas around an event or that sort of thing, where people could pick up and drop off bikes. Even if there was not an installed piece of infrastructure, you could create geofenced temporary dock areas, or you can also allow people simply to drop off and to leave a bike anywhere, and they pay a little bit more. But it provides a much greater level of flexibility, and also not the anxiety of, if I get back to the station and it's all full, what am I going to do? I have to keep driving, trying to find a station, like you have to do in DC and most other systems. So the smart bike technology is a big step forward, but we wouldn't be the first to test it. There are several other cities in the country that have just begun, so we know what the bugs are. And we're also looking towards adding a portion of them as electric bikes, electric assisted bikes, which is an issue in this region, not for hills, but it is for heat. So we're going to be testing out electric-assisted bikes as part of that bike share program. So the negotiations are going fine. We expect to wrap them up soon, but now that we've released the name of the proposed operator, I want to make sure council was aware. And then the last thing I mentioned at our last meeting, we're having a vigorous debate about TDM, Transportation Demand Management funding priorities. The TDM funds are funds that have traditionally been allocated at the regional scale to support the transportation management agencies. For us, it's the YOLO TMA, or what I think is now called YOLO Commute, or the YOLO Commute Association, or something like that. And traditionally, the TDM funds have been used under the theory that if we could educate and make people aware about the value of ride sharing, for example, and carpooling to work, and if TDM funds could be used to help subsidize van pooling. So those are the kinds of things that TDM have been doing through these intermediary organizations of the TMAs. Not surprisingly, the TMAs have come to expect that this is their funding source, and in the advent of the climate work in SB 375 and AB 32, we no longer have the luxury of allocating TDM funds unless we're going to be able to demonstrate there's a specific emission reduction. So it can no longer be faith-based marketing, but we have to see, is it the case that putting up a poster inside the copy room at City Hall saying ride share, does that actually work? I mean, does it actually reduce the amount of emissions that are occurring? If so, let's do more of it. If not, then let's stop doing it altogether. And so we're having to look at more performance and evidence-based approaches, even though it's threatening to some of the TMA folks, and particularly here in YOLO. Here in the city, I think in West Sacramento, for the YOLO Transportation Management Agency, there are only 3 West Sac members, us, Capitol Yards, and STIRS, and we required STIRS and Capitol Yards to join. So there are no voluntary business members in the TMA, and none other than us, no major employer. So it's unlike in Davis, where the university and the hospital and several other major employers are part of it. So they're really working on private sector approaches to reducing single occupant vehicle trips. In West Sacramento, it's not really functioning in that way. So it's a particularly live question for us. But it will continue to be, I think we're making progress. We're carving some of the money out this time for an innovation fund that will support some of the things that we've been talking about in terms of different ways of getting to mobility. But it's still a small amount of money. I think we're going to have to keep pressing on it, but it is encouraging that at least we're starting to get, the full SACOG board is recognizing that it's time we're going to have to do things differently if we're going to deliver on mobility and also meet our air quality and climate demands. So with that, that's all the reports I have. We don't have any appointments this evening, so we're going to proceed to the consent agenda, which is items 2 through 10. And you have a memo at your desk from the city manager that notes that we didn't have the proposed salary range for the accounting manager job, but it is in the memo at $90,000 to $110,000. So that memo is a clarification to item 3. And there is because the consent agenda item is here, item 2 doesn't have a PowerPoint presentation. But so are there any items on consent that any member of the council wishes to remove, or any item for a separate question or comment? All right, seeing none, is there a motion? It's been moved by Mr. Johannesson and seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Sandine. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Consent agenda is adopted. Item 11 is public hearing and consideration of Resolution 16-49, adopting the 2015 Urban Water Management Plan and amending the Book of City Fees. Are you our transportation?
Jack of all trades.
Okay, all right. Did I read the item wrong?
Yes, good evening, Mayor and City Council. I am Rafael Martinez with the Public Works Department. The Urban Water Management Plan is a study that is performed by all large urban water suppliers and is updated every 5 years with the California Department of Water Resources. It is also an update that has been closely coordinated with the United States Bureau of Water Reclamation as well as with the Regional Water Authority. This study spells out specifically water planning elements such as water demand and supply analysis, water quality analysis, conservation practices, and water shortage contingency plans, among other things. This urban water management plan is different from the 2015 Water Master Plan that was presented to you in July of this year by Cameron. That city report is a study on the infrastructure of the city. So we're looking at pipes, we're looking at tanks, and we're looking at the rates that go along with that. The intent of the Urban Water Master Management Plan is instead to take all that infrastructure as well as any population growth and determine whether we are managing that water effectively, if we are going to be able to provide a good quality of water, as well as what steps we are taking in order to make sure that we are conserving that water. And then we share that information and that plan with the water boards as well as with the federal government. So with that said, I'll pass the baton over to Nicola Fontaine, who is an associate with Corello Consulting. She's going to further go highlight some of the conclusions that was in this plan, and then I'll finish it off at the end.
So this Urban Water Management Plan was an update to the 2010 Urban Water Management Plan, and the major changes that you'll find in the 2015 plan are that the DWR guidelines for preparation of the Urban Water Management Plan rearranged all the chapters and required standardized tables and SBX 77 compliance tables. Also, the population analysis had to be done with 2010 census data, which wasn't really finally released until 2012. And then with the new population analysis, baseline and target water use calculations from 2010 were adjusted. And then also, the growth rate was 2.2% for the population in 2010, and it's been modified to 2.7 to agree with the planning department. And water losses now have to be recorded in an American Water Works Association free water audit software, and in 2010, those were previously just estimated, whereas 2015, we've now filled out the proper forms, and the city will proceed with using those every year. The water features need to be fully defined in 2015, so that means pools and spas need to be separated from ornamental water features in the code. And then the method of reporting demand management measures has been greatly simplified from 2010, and those are measures to reduce water consumption. And then there was also a climate change vulnerability assessment. That was a checklist that we reviewed with the city and have filled that in, and that's one of the appendices. And then other changes were to the water shortage contingency plan, and those changes included stages and then having restrictions and prohibitions by stage and standardized tables. So now I'm going to, okay. So the city produces the Urban Water Management Plan because it's required for suppliers serving more than 3,000 connections or more than 3,000 acre-feet annually, and in 2015, the city provided roughly 10,000 acre-feet and had a little over 15,000 connections. And it's done to comply with the Urban Water Management Planning Act of 1983 and its amendments, and it must be filed every 5 years, as Raphael said, and the purpose is to maintain efficient use of water supplies, to ensure sufficient supplies are available for future use, and to provide a mechanism for response during drought conditions. And as mentioned, it requires a lot of coordination and outreach. So for preparation of the plan, we worked with the Department of Public Works, the Fire Department, Planning Department, City Environmental Services, and then we also notified other stakeholders of the plan preparation and the public adoption. Those included Dunnigan Water District, Yolo County Department of Water Resources, United States Bureau of Reclamation, Regional Water Authority, North Delta Water Agency, and the public. So you go to the next slide. So as part of the Urban Water Management Plan, we calculated the 10-year baseline water use and then targets. So this is in gallons per capita per day. And so the baseline from 2001 to 2010 was 293 gallons per capita per day. And then the calculated target to meet in 2020 is 234. The interim target calculated is 264 gallons per capita per day. And then the actual water use for the city was only 183 gallons per capita per day. So the city easily achieved the target and the SBX 77 compliance. You also met the 2020 target in 2015, so it shows how successful the city conservation efforts were during the drought conditions and how well the public acted on these conservation measures. And then the key changes to the water shortage contingency plan include a change to the stages of actions. We've now added a stage 0 that just reflects normal water conditions, and that would include all the water waste prevention ordinance type wasteful water use. And then we have the standardized tables now with the restrictions and prohibitions by stage, so it's very clear what should and shouldn't be done during different stages. And then there's a section on enforcement measures and consumption reduction measures. And we also added that these stages can be implemented by the supply condition, but they can also be state mandated, which is probably more than likely going to be the case with the city since you have such a reliable water supply in the future. So for the future, as I said, it's a very reliable surface water supply. There's a potential for groundwater opportunities in the future if needed. All the connections in the city are going to be metered by 2018, and from that you'll be able to easily quantify distribution system losses, and you can track warnings and violations to work with the public to maintain an efficient use of the water supplies. And just maintain the water use as it's been going, and you'll have no problem meeting your 2020 target. I'll leave for questions, if there's any questions.
City Council, that does conclude our presentation. One last note I did want to mention was that the Public Works Department has publicly provided access to this plan on our city website since September the 1st. We also have advertised the plan on the newsletter for the past 2 weeks, and we've had a copy of the plan itself here at our front counter at City Hall, as well as at the Arthur Turner Library. So at this time, we respectfully request that City Council open up the meeting for public hearing, and or any questions that the public or yourselves might have for us or concerns. We can address them. After that, we'd like to respectfully close for public hearing, and then subsequently open up past the resolution. And on a side note, I did want to say that we already did catch one little error on the report. If you do have a draft there in front of you, the cover does have the Old City logo on it, so we're already on that. We're changing it, and that will be on the final draft. So with that said, if you have any questions for Nicola or myself, more than welcome.
Are there any other questions in that than the logo, or?
We hope not. Other than that, it's perfect.
I know, I understand from IT, our server was overloaded by downloads of the document by the folks in the public. But Mr. Johannesson?
Yeah, just a little context of what this is. So I understand that it's required by the state, the regulatory authority in the state to put this together. Cities have to do this, or water suppliers have to do this. But in terms of city operations, it provides a baseline of what the inventory of what we have in the city, and to what extent does it further city goals?
It helps you understand your water supply for the future. It plans out to 2040, so you can see population growth versus your supply and meeting those demands, and then sources and reliability. And then also methods to reduce water consumption or to help with conservation measures throughout the city.
And so what would be the ramifications of not following this plan, for example?
Well, I would say you could possibly not meet your 2020 target. And I'm not sure if that has funding ramifications if you don't meet that, but
Okay.
I believe it does.
That was kind of the question, yeah. All right, well, thanks.
Can I just put a finer point on so what you said were the benefits of the plan? I thought we examined those same exact issues in the master plan. Like, what does supply and demand look like? You know, do we have adequate and reliable supply through a forecast year? And then what are the strategies that we could employ to reduce demand? Is there what's the value? I mean, other than it being mandated, I mean, I'm not suggesting we shouldn't do it, but what is the value add over what we already did in the water master plan? And in the future, could we consolidate these into a single planning effort?
So essentially what the master plan is doing is illustrating the infrastructure and the rates that we need for the city's build-out. What the urban water management plan does is it shows to the state and to the federal government that we are going through and we're taking the steps to conserve that water as well, not just build enough infrastructure to provide water, but what steps we're also taking to conserve that water. Along those lines, it also gives us the opportunity then to go for state grants and funding because it shows that we are doing our due diligence to take the steps to make sure that we conserve our water and that we're managing our water correctly and appropriately. So that's the purpose of this, and we probably could combine them, but they definitely are two different subjects that we want to separate. One has to do more with capital, the other one has to do more of a state reporting and a federal reporting to make sure that we are able to go for grants and that we're doing our due diligence.
But if they were going to go separate, it seems like you would do this one first, right? So rather than figure out how much pipes and capacity and plant stuff to build in order to meet demand, and then do a study on how much demand you actually have to have. You know, if you could just reduce demand, after you've already decided and set your whole fees based on what your you know, in the master plan, what your demand forecast is, it just seems like the odd order. I mean, it's not a problem with this one. I'm just thinking about looking ahead. It feels like it should be a single planning effort, or at least that these numbers ought to form the basis of the next water master plan, as opposed to you figure out your whole infrastructure plan, and then you produce this for the state and federal government. But if it's a good plan and it's actually figuring out new and good and innovative ways for us to reduce demand, and we've already earlier this same year voted on a demand structure, an estimated demand, and then building a plant this size and pipes this big and fees this high, that seems like that's out of order. So, as I said, it's not an issue for this time because we're doing this because of the mandates. But it seems like as we go around, do this around again, that figuring out how to not do some of the same forecasts and consolidate this work between this one and the master plan and to get the sequencing better would be
Yes,
to our benefit.
typically, this is done after, we usually do these after general plans and water master plans are more recent, and then the urban water management plans are every 5 years, so usually those other plans are either done or they're being completed on a different time cycle. So this was just a case of the city was completing all the plans at once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you see what I'm saying is that, like, if we do a traffic plan and we say, okay, we're going to have this many cars, and therefore we need to build our streets need to be 6 lanes wide. Mm-hmm. And then 6 months later, we do a new study that says, here's our master plan for reducing the number of people driving, and everybody's going to ride a bike, and therefore we have half as many cars. But we just did a master plan to make 6-lane highways, and we just imposed traffic fees on everybody to pay for 6-lane highways. So it's just figuring out how to make sure that this information is feeding our capital planning, because that's where our spending comes in. And where our businesses and our residents' fees and monthly charges come in, that it should be based on this information as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah.
Mayor Pro Tem Sinding, were you?
My only comment, I agree with trying to get things in the right order. For me, the plan, though, I've had a number of questions along the way since I've served on council about being able to continue to grow as a city, and I feel like the urban water management plan actually gives us a basis to actually be able to grow and have the water we need. Just when we were going through the drought, it was really concerning me, like, oh my goodness, we won't have enough water, and we're going to be building out Southport, but this actually asks and answers those questions.
Mr. Ledesma.
Thank you, and I appreciate the update, and it's always curious how these plans come and how they come to the timing of them, because I think while I wasn't quite where the mayor was in understanding, or at least connecting how the capital plan comes before the plan. It makes sense, but I realize some of these are on cycles and we're when I get to them. But I think the way we should be, maybe we should be a little more thoughtful. I appreciate your comments on that, Mr. Mayor. And the part that, again, it does give you a good point of view of sort of how we manage and how we sustain our water supply, not just how we get it and get it here and distribute it to our residents and the fees involved. The one area that I kind of took note of, and I lost my place, I'm sorry, is on, the contingency planning piece. And it's just, I think all we did here is just take what we already have done, correct? We did on the stage, we had a stage 0, right, on the contingency plan.
And the prohibitions and restrictions have been put into those standardized tables, and the whole plan is now based on the regional water authorities' standards.
Which is similar, it's similar to what I know the governors.
similar.
Yeah, okay,
And
so I want to make.
the permanently prohibited uses are now part of your water storage contingency plan as well.
Right, and I think that's the part I want to make sure we're staying consistent with what we've been implementing over the last year. I know things changed when the governor imposed restrictions, and we had to follow those, but I think that's the area. I just want to make sure that they're remaining consistent with what we had done before, without any sort of legend of what it was before and what it is. So I appreciate this, and it's a good place to have that, so that you could, again, we didn't have the handbook, so to say, when the drought comes, what do you do? This is what you pull out, this is what our guide is, so.
And we worked with the fire department and environmental services to make sure things were included in the water shortage contingency plan that are specific to the city of West Sacramento as well.
Okay, terrific, thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, with that, we're going to open the public hearing on item 11. We don't have any requests to speak on this item, but because it is a mandated public hearing, does anyone wish to address the council on item 11? Seeing none, I want to close the public hearing, return to the council for any further question or discussion or motion.
I'll move the recommended action.
Second.
Been moved by Mr. Ledesma and seconded by Mr. Kristoff. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. That brings us to item 12, which is a public workshop on General Plan 2035 draft policy document. And Mr. Shelley, for following along purpose, the staff report references that the policy elements have been reviewed by the commissions and the council, and it says see attachment 2. Is attachment 2 this? I thought this was the policy. Is there an attachment that actually describes the prior recommendations and discussion of the council and the commissions?
The attachment 2 is the actual policy document itself, which we provided to the council a little bit in advance of your normal packet, given its length.
Okay. Okay, well, your presentation may get at this. What I didn't see in the staff report anywhere was when the council did the workshop on this item, the council identified this issue, that issue, this issue, and this issue, and here's what we did. I know that because this is not the only item before us, so we tend not to have, we don't have our notes from our prior meetings. So it's helpful for us when there's some part of the documentation that shows us, reminds us what the questions and the policy recommendations and direction that the council gave at its prior sessions were, so we can see if it happened or not, and if not, if we can understand why. So maybe if you can cover that in the presentation, that would be great.
Okay. Yes. I apologize for not itemizing those items in the staff report for you this evening. Oh, there it is. So tonight we are here on the policy document for our general plan efforts, and what's before you tonight represents really the culmination of a lot of work from numerous city staff, both past and present, across almost virtually all city departments, to put together the policy document for consideration. And we have brought individual elements to the various commissions and to the council over the last year or so, but tonight is the first time that we're going to consider the document sort of in its totality. And so this is a major milestone for this general plan effort. What was part of my presentation would be a sort of a high-level overview of each of the elements within the policy document, and be happy to take questions on each element as we go, or go through everything, and we can take it all up afterward. But as the council will note, the land use element is one of the most more fundamental and core elements in general plan. It's one of the required elements. As noted on the PowerPoint slide and summarized in your staff report, these are the major themes that are addressed within the land use element, and then there are policies and implementation measures that address the goals that are related to these themes. And many of these are ones that we've, maintained in our current general plan and have been implemented through city policy and other mechanisms. Certainly sustainability and regional growth coordination are things that we have been doing considerably over the years in our community. And we're still providing for a variety of land uses throughout our community as we have and continue to build on past planning efforts and council city policy. This is the land use map that's been before the council on a few occasions previously, and what has served as the basis for study in the general plan EIR. For the most part, most land use designations are remaining consistent, and we continue to grow as a city. We are recommending some new mixed-use designations be applied along a segment of West Capitol Avenue to help reinforce some of the prior West Capitol Avenue planning work. Also within Stone Lock area, having one overall mixed-use designation there rather than the 4 or 5 designations that are on there currently. And then also along Sacramento Avenue, which we feel is somewhat analogous to West Capitol Avenue, that a more mixed-use designation on many of those parcels provide greater flexibility to help some of those areas infill and refill. The urban structure and design element is another element that's in our current general plan and provides sort of broad level design guidance for important areas of the city, such as gateways and along the waterfront. And then this element is supported through more detailed design guidelines that our specific plans carry, the Southport Framework Plan along West Capitol Avenue and other areas of the city where we want to move into certain design themes or features. Economic development, this is a new element for us in our general plan, although this is becoming a very common theme in many general plans across California. It's essentially, putting within the general plan, which is such a foundational document, how economic development is a priority for the city, and that we will continue to maintain, community investment action plan and similar documents going forward, especially in the post-redevelopment era. And we maintain some of our continuing efforts on workforce development and business retention and attraction, and that having this as a policy matter in the general plan does provide this as a prime, effort and mission for the city. Mobility, this is was the former circulation element. This is now, the mobility is much more the term of art. This really begins to address all modes in a much more, cohesive and compatible manner. We have the necessary complete streets policies in this particular element to comply with SB 375. And then also this is where more recently SB 743 has come into play, which is addressing how level of service is addressed primarily in CEQA analyses. But to tee us up for that, which we believe the ultimate guidance will come from the resource agency, hopefully within the next several months. We're moving LOS, is maintaining the revised policy that the council previously directed us to implement. But as analyses go forward on projects, we'll be moving more into the vehicle miles traveled model that SB 743 has allowed, and keeping LOS as an important city goal, but maintaining it more as a general plan consistency matter going forward, rather than becoming a hard and fast, threshold for future analyses. Documents will remain looking at level of service, but more on a general plan consistency basis. We believe this implements past decisions, such as in the Bridge District, where in that planning effort, the council recognized the value of walking, biking, transit, and that was not going to make decisions based on cars that would impair those other modes. And then goods movement in our community, including at the Port of West Sacramento, will remain an important objective for us. Public facilities and services is another more core element. Really addresses our core infrastructure needs on all facets and utilities, wastewater collection, solid waste, but also now is picking up some newer items that are considered to be an important public service, including broadband. We have a broadband effort in our community that we have been working on with economic development, and now we're trying to establish, broadband needs to be at the table as an important public service in addition to these other, foundational utilities. And of course, this will also address city services that our residents benefit from, even if they aren't directly provided by the city, such as schools and libraries. And then this also addresses some core response goals for our police and fire and other emergency services. Recreation, this is an important element that we have been working on, and through the prior commission looking at it. Our primary goal on this was tracking with the age-friendly community effort and recognizing the value of multiple forms of recreation and not just, formal parks with baseball diamonds, but that trails, other passive forms of recreation have value. And that, in total, when we consider all of our recreational amenities in our community, including, the river and ship channel and the recreational opportunities that those provide, that we would be significantly in excess of our overall goal, and then being in line with what some of the national standards are that are when we get evaluated for the age-friendly community effort. And then this will also then provide a high-level foundation for the ultimate Parks Master Plan, which is a project that we know we need to be working on to update here in the near future. Natural and cultural resources is also many times in the past has been known as a conservation element. This does address our natural resources that we have in our community, which are abundant. We recognize we are a community that's going to grow over time, but that we do have a responsibility in terms of conservation, and our goal is to seek a balance of the growth that we're planning with conservation of these resources, both natural resources as well as cultural and historic resources, which is becoming a much greater area of emphasis with our projects now that we're into doing a lot of the AB 52 consultation work with our affected Native American tribes. Safety element, this is another one of the mandated elements, and is very important. It addresses various hazards that may exist in our community. It incorporates the SB 5 flood protection policies that the council approved June last year, and we're carrying all of those over. And this is also now where we start to see the linkage with climate change, and where now this will see where there's the interwoven nature with our climate action plan, which we'll also be seeking council approval on, as part of the general plan update effort. That is one of the things we're working on, currently, identifying the various measures that will be in the climate action plan, and that this now will establish the relationship between the climate action plan and the general plan, although the climate action plan will remain technically a standalone document. And healthy community is another new element, and this is the one that really addresses, citywide on a lot of factors, and it supports many of the other policy objectives in the general plan. Connectivity, active living, these things relate, back to land use and mobility and vice versa. And this is also where we'll start looking at community safety and some of the crime prevention through environmental design objectives. Because really all of these matters, including not the least of which is childcare, which is something that we've had a separate element in our general plan all these years, one of the first in the state to do so. And that will become part of this element rather than being a standalone element, but retain our childcare goals as those relate back to some of the economic development goals and the other elements. So this is an important new element. It addresses a lot of topics that are maybe beyond in past general plans in many communities, but really the connection between land use and health and mobility is really where these plans are at these days and going into the future. And so we really believe this is includes important policy statements for the city. So where we are with general plan overall, the EIR was on the street, and that comment period just ended this past Monday. We did get a handful of comments in from both community members and outside agencies. So we're working on the final EIR, which will include formal responses to those comments. And then we're doing the council workshop tonight. We went to the Planning Commission on this last week. We are looking to hopefully go to the Planning Commission in a formal hearing at one of their October meetings. And then presuming that happens, then we'd like to come back to the council in a November, December timeframe and hopefully seek action on the overall general plan and the EIR. So with that, I'll close my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions or comments? Mr. Johannesson?
Are we going to go through this section by section, or you looking for general comments at this point?
Well, let me get a sense. Do you have questions on several? It looks like you have a lot of flags. I mean, not relative to me. I have the same numbers, but if folks have just one or two questions, maybe we should just do it all at once. But if we've got a few in each section, why don't we go section by section? So,
I think
what's your?
either is fine with me.
You have more than one question, I assume.
Yes.
And you as well.
Or this comment, yeah.
Okay.
Either way.
All right, let's go section by section, the big section by big section, just to make sure we don't lose any of the key pieces. So each of the key elements, starting with the
Land use.
land use element.
So, yeah, I think, big picture-wise, the Age-Friendly Advisory Committee, if we're looking at this from an aging or healthy living perspective, there's going to be a number of areas in here that are going to be impacted by, we're basically a parallel track, I think, in that committee and what we're doing here. And we had a brief discussion yesterday at the meeting about how that effort will feed into the general plan, and I think John Robinson, who did an excellent job of putting this all together, indicated that there would be some matching of goals and policies that would come to council with this aging action plan, and how that would fit into the policy document here. Because, for example, the mobility is obviously one, broadband is one, digital access is one, but also the land use on, if you're trying to create areas that are age-friendly, you want to try to look at ground floor living and near transit stops so you don't have the, difficulty in getting the last block or last two blocks. So I guess the point is just, we're going to be adopting this thing, later this year, early next year?
The general plan?
Yeah.
Yeah, I am targeting November, December this year for action by council.
And so we've got this other processes going that's going to come out with a plan in June of next year. So, but there'll be a lot of interaction. So how do you see that meshing?
Well, what I would foresee is that the general plan help form a foundation for what is to come within that effort, which is, probably a little more detailed effort than at the general plan level. I believe that a lot of the themes we were weaving into this, especially with the health of community part, are certainly supportive of that effort, at least, philosophically. I haven't spoken with Mr. Robinson since that last meeting occurred. But I see the general plan as really being the foundation for many other city endeavors that get into a more detailed basis.
Yeah, it may be worth time just to look at that, the health survey that Yolo County did, because it identifies there's 4 or 5 that are key areas of gaps. And for example, transportation would be one, or housing would be another. And just to maybe just glance through that, because I'm seeing a lot of the comments in here, I think the policies in here are good. But just to make sure that we're capturing things that I'm sure are going to be coming up in that committee, because they've been identified as, at least countywide, as problems, and we're looking at getting more Yolo County or West Sac specific data. But those items will be popping out later.
Just on that, and then we'll go to the other questions in this section. Just on this one, though, for much of the last decade, I think we have used the general plan update as a parking lot for many issues and ideas, most of which we didn't deal with in the general plan update, to be perfectly frank, and Mr. Johannesson brought up a lot of them. But we haven't also not done that many general plan updates on their own. I just wonder whether trying to sort of have to the livable community stuff, like trying to forecast what that work's going to be now, as opposed to just determining, I forget how many general plan updates we're legally allowed to do, but if we just determine that at some point in the next, a year from now or whatever, we will package we'll package them in an actual update that's based on what we've learned, rather than trying to guess now whether that might be a more effective approach to doing it right.
That actually, it relates to my, I brought this up when we were looking at the draft, I think the draft EIR about autonomous vehicles, because I read an article today about it's going to be here even faster than we were talking about, like 10, 15 years. Now I read today, 5 years is going to change everything. And I just keep thinking about land use and about reuse of like parking lots that become parks and all these other things that we'll have to contemplate. But maybe that's the answer. Maybe when it actually is like a year away or 2 years away, or we do a pilot project, then we might be able to cluster some of those issues, because I think it relates to land use and transportation mobility, and it's related to a lot of things, and we're going to have to grapple with it, but it is kind of crystal balling it, I'd say, and we could be making sections up that may or may not, maybe aren't really based on data or reality. But I do think that is going to change a lot of what we're doing pretty quickly, like within 5 years. So that's actually a solution, though, is doing a packaging of kind of amendments or additions at some point.
Yeah, I personally, I think on that issue, I highlighted the autonomous one as well, that we need a goal and a policy item on it. We're not in the process, with livable communities, we're in the process of developing a comprehensive strategy and whatever, so we can't foresee what that is. But we could foresee a policy on autonomous vehicles that we will look for opportunities for pilots and testing or whatever, that just signals and gives us the lane to be in that area. Because we're not on the verge of some big comprehensive policy like we are with this one. So I think that's actually an area where we could add a specific piece that would be as specific as most of the rest of the policy elements. But for the ARP work, it just feels like we're not ready,
No.
and at least not ready to do it well.
No.
So, did you other questions on the land use element, Mr. Ledesma?
I did not.
Okay. Did you have any on that section?
I think if we are going to attempt to add in the autonomous vehicles, it's mobility, but it also, I think, affects land use. So I don't have the actual wording, but I think we'll have a number of opportunities to have some kind of reuse of some of our land use, or kind of recapturing some of the land, because autonomous vehicles will potentially not take up as much space as roadways and intersections, and all those things that we think of now that we have to spend a lot of time on and that actually affect our land development will be changing quickly.
I did have just on the land use element in particular, a couple of comments in maybe three different buckets. The first is and it may be here, but I didn't see it in it, and it permeates pretty much all the land use area, which is this distinction that we have been evolving between the entertainment zone and other parts of the city, right? Creating parts of which we already have, even before the entertainment zone, we were creating a distinction between the urban and the suburban part of the city. The entertainment zone in some way is a further refinement of that within the urban, that there are parts of the city that will be urban, but that won't be loud and messy and colliding and diverse in that same way, by design. That's an outcome that we're trying to get to. And it's still the case that many of our policy elements they're written in a way that's trying to serve all those things, right? So, you know, it'll be stable, and it'll be protected from anything incompatible, it'll be quiet, which is the right thing for, it's definitely the right thing for the suburban part of our town. It might be the right approach for some parts of the urban area, but it's not the right framing of the land use vision for the entertainment zone. So I'm not exactly sure how to deal with that. It popped in my head, it popped up for me at first when I read just the description of what the residential neighborhoods section of the element was about. Because we describe residential neighborhoods, we describe mixed-use neighborhoods, we describe waterfront, but in residential neighborhoods, which I thought was going to be about neighborhoods that were predominantly or exclusively residential, it ends with, this ranges from those, from, you know, villages in Southport, to planned urban neighborhoods along the riverfront. And I'm not sure, I mean, other than the project at the very far end of Southport along the river, that the other projects along the riverfront, they belong, those belong in the mixed-use districts and corridors or in the waterfront section. They don't belong being covered by the residential neighborhood section of the general plan. Because those policies really are about how to protect stability and how to make sure nothing incompatible is ever seen or heard. I mean, those are, we want those policies. And people choose those neighborhoods largely for that kind of a vibe. But they don't apply well when applied to mixed-use districts simultaneously. So that was what first keyed me onto this notion that we do need to be more explicitly distinguishing between the different lifestyle and expectations about what land use is going to be doing in those areas, because you move to the entertainment zone area in part because, or you choose that place to live in part because of its diversity and its collisions and its messiness and its noise and its activity. That's not a negative. It is a negative if you're on a cul-de-sac in Bridgeway Lakes, right? So rather than try to write a policy line that applies both things, we need to do a better job, I think, of trying to distinguish them. And I leave it to you to like how that might be accomplished. But I do think that for me that was one of the fundamental issues in this section. Maybe related, but only a little bit, is that I felt like the attention to street activation, which has consistently come up at council with projects, again, particularly but not exclusively in the entertainment zone and in the urban area, ought to be its own specific policy statement in here. It's sort of implied in the sense that, we say residential be on the second floor, but it has been a central part of our policy strategy as projects have emerged, and from CalSTRS to residential things. I mean, over and over and over again, it's one of the things that you can consistently guess is going to come up at council. So that sort of policy ought to be not implied. It ought to be more directly related in the general plan. Then I think my last comment on the land use section was just in the implementation programs. It's a lot of studies and a lot of annual reports and all that. Are these the same implementation programs as before, or do you test these internal to the department heads, and the departments say, hey, do we need to do an annual report on vacant and underutilized property, or could that be just as useful if we did it every other year? I mean, do we need to do a tank farm relocation study again in the Pioneer Bluffs area, or can we just let nature take its course? Do we need a study that determines which projects are considered infill or not? So it wasn't the threshold of value to the city of many of these studies and reports. It wasn't clear to me that any of them might be a nice thing to do if you had unlimited resources. But it just wasn't clear that these would be, if I had to pick, 8 studies in the land use arena over the next 25 years, that these would be the 8 that I would definitely need, or that as a member of the public I would definitely need in order to help to see the vision of the general plan come to reality. So it wasn't equivocal about any particular one, but only that I hope you're putting your green eye shades on across the department, saying, okay, is this really general plan level, and is it worthy of committing that we're going to be in what is the next thing down from our Constitution, committing that we're going to be doing that kind of a report or study over the coming years. And then just one fine point on this one, on one of the implementation programs, is the decision to renew essentially the Sacramento Riverfront Joint Master Plan. I think we should have that conversation, but I just want to highlight that would be a choice that we would need to make. I think somewhere else in the general plan it says that we will use the joint riverfront master plan to guide design choices and that sort of thing along the riverfront. And that plan's awfully old now compared to what we're actually doing. And it feels like that plan ought to inform what we do, but it's no longer the guide, and give it, 15 years later. And whether or not we choose to do a whole new master plan effort or simply do an inventory of what we're both already doing and slap it, together in a two-page summary or something, I think is still a decision that we need to make. And I wouldn't want to back into a commitment that we were going to engage in a joint planning effort with the other side of the river if we're both proceeding along in a direction that is compatible already. When we first did that Sacramento Riverfront Master Plan, we weren't doing anything together. I mean, so it was needed for us to like get together, write our own plan together. But it's not clear to me that today that's necessarily the case.
Okay.
So I'm not saying no, but we and the department leadership should be thinking about whether that's really the right approach in terms of spending our resources and our commitments to writing up a whole new joint plan. All right, anything else on this chapter? Mr. Ledesma?
Thank you. I just had a quick question, and it's really just around a little bit of form or, David, in terms of articulating. So on the neighborhood section, a couple of areas that I just kind of paid attention to because the way the policy statement is read, kind of articulating the goal we're after. So on, what page am I on? 216, right, on the walkable neighborhoods. We encourage, we articulate there that we want walkable neighborhoods, and we articulate in the goal some of the, what that might mean. And is that further, I'm trying to see how that relates back to the mobility area, or, I'm just trying to figure out, is that, the part that I'm trying to get at is, well, we'll require, this says the required design development neighborhoods that are pedestrian friendly, and features such as, it kind of gives it what, kind of an outline of what that might mean. I think the goal, and especially kind of where we kind of went in Southport specifically, and I think we had some of those same goals in that policy documents back when, but it just never felt like, well, we have trails now through the branch line trail. It never got past sort of the minimum that had to be done. And I'm thinking specifically about Southport Town Center. We had the Access Assemble Sacramento group here earlier, how everyone's trying to figure out how we can be more mobility, more access, pedestrian friendly, bike access. I remember being on planning commission, this was an issue, just how do everybody did the minimum amount. I'm just trying to think of how in this document we can, does it drive home the need for more of that? While this is a good statement, I'm looking for more of that pedestrian encouraging almost, rather than pedestrian friendly. Does this mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. It relates back to mobility element, which, really stresses the connectivity. So we're in closing gaps where we have, connectivity issues, in the, existing developed parts of town. Because this is something we really want to have, not just in new neighborhoods, but everywhere.
Right. And specific, I'm looking at over on how we bring up things like the neighborhood serving centers and the commercial centers. How do we encourage, that have the same encouraging, if we have our encouraging our bike master plan, everything else that's really encouraging bike traffic, how do we encourage those same ones to kind of accept it? So it's just something that I like to kind of keep in mind, how that works together with this.
Yeah, I think we really need to look at, the implementation side of some of these policies, which will come through the specific plans, through zoning, our community, our standard specifications.
Right.
That's really how it gets implemented in the day-to-day world. And so this is providing the foundation for those other documents, some of which we will need to update post-general plan and bring forth and that will be really the nuts and bolts of implementing the general plan in the real world.
Thank you.
All right, then on to urban structure and design element. Any questions or comments on that element? Everything I had on that section I already said in the first one, so they bled together. But is there anything further on that? Mr. Johannesson?
This is an off question, but the iron triangle, is that a thing? I
think that might be a bit of an older terminology, but that's generally the F Street and Triangle Court area. Historically had a lot of trucking uses over there that, you know, the general plan has long sought to relocate to the western part of the city.
Okay, yeah, I just noticed it was mentioned in a couple different areas.
Yeah, no neighborhood names themselves that, so.
Yeah, it's sort of the area that sort of got between the two rail lines.
Right, right,
Yeah.
yeah. All right, well, I mean, yeah, that's all.
All right, economic development element. Questions on this one? Short and sweet. I would just point out that the workforce development section here would change dramatically with our Measure E investments in terms of the actual policy framework. This is we talked about this one, I think, when it was in very first draft. This is pretty standard WIB workforce development framework, but we have a pretty significant initiative that's embedded in Measure E on this as well. So we came back to that at another time.
No?
The business retention part of that is extremely important because that's where, quite frankly, the vast majority of growth in employment comes from. So I just want to make sure we stress that.
Mr. Johansson?
Thank you, Mr. Yeah, so on this, I'm going to kind of straddle that and economic development of public facilities. So this issue of broadband, you've got an ED 2.4, broadband internet expansion, but, which is great for business. We need that. We need faster bandwidth here and more accessible. But in the public service and facilities and services element, it looks like we're, relying on wireless hotspots as a means to, have universal high-speed access. And I know there's a dialogue going in the country now about whether this is actually right or should be treated as public utility, and it just doesn't seem to be, I think, strong enough in the public facilities and services element on, the commitment to, something to the effect that recognizing the digital divide and how services can be provided more effectively if people are connected, that type of thing. That it's an important element on how we use technology to make sure technology is available to everybody. So I don't know, would that be maybe a stronger policy language or maybe retooling some of these or?
Yeah, that's something we will look at, and especially with our economic development staff that's working on the broadband effort already.
Okay.
So where's the hotspot piece? I see the.
It's on page 112-7, it's PFS 6.4.
That's in the public facilities and services element.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was in Econ Dev and I didn't.
Yeah, I know, I was
okay.
trying kind of both.
Okay. And then the Econ Dev element has the one on the business-related
Right,
broadband. Okay,
right.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I agree, totally, okay. Okay. Mobility element? President Sandine?
I think I mentioned this in the land uses. I think somehow adding, or maybe even transforming a goal, but having some capability that we're preparing for or embracing or somehow getting ready for autonomous vehicles and autonomous vehicle travel in its different forms would be helpful. It could go under M1, I believe. I'm trying to get a placement for it because it would be part of a multimodal transportation system. But somehow, I think the mayor's point earlier about being ready to, I guess, embrace that or pilot it or.
At least explore. right,
Explore,
right,
yeah.
Explore and test.
Explore and test, that's fine.
Yeah. The other one I think is, if it's here, I don't see it as clearly as it should be, which is the rideshare, or rideshare as a strategy, as opposed to rideshare as a regulatory question about taxis, but rideshare as a last mile provider, or as a paratransit alternative, or the kinds of things that we in other cities have been exploring. We ought to be signaling that in the general plan. And
Agreed. Yeah, I was going to bring that up because we also, I know, Public Works staff is working on sort of what we were thinking, articulating transportation strategy, or how it interacts with, we started to explore that, so some of that should be articulated here.
And in transit, I know we've been having, I mean, the Y actually is a good example, but I know we've also been having discussions with our transit provider around, focus on trunk lines and that sort of, the impacts on autonomous vehicles for the transit sector. And I know a lot of folks in the State Transportation Transit Association have been saying more frequently that they think the only transit services that are likely to survive and that are needed to survive are the main trunk lines. So as opposed to the 39 that, or the 41 that weave all over the world, but the focus and put your resources on protecting and expanding and improving the frequency of and reliability of the Jefferson line or the West Capitol line, and then ride sharing and bikes and bike share and everything, and I'll get you to the trunk lines, but the transit, you no longer envision that the transit service is going to go to everywhere that everyone is. Right. That is a policy choice, and I know we've already been engaging those conversations through Mr. Ledesma at YCDD and our staff have as well. If that's where if we're moving in that direction, which it seems like the only financially and service sustainable approach. Again, it feels like maybe something we should be considering signaling in the plan, not in a hard way, like this is going to be the new thing, but that we're committed to exploring or pursuing a sustainable, streamlined transit service with first and last mile solution supplements or so. I don't know what the language is, but that is because we are already embarking in that arena. Feels like it should be.
Correct.
Most of the elements that are here are really about transit. They're the transit things that we've been saying in the last general plan too. When the world changed.
But the transit, as you pointed out, it's just the landscape of it has changed so much. We've got to start at least providing us a roadway to go. Like you said, signaling that we can approach that. So, and that's what I was getting at, because we are starting to have that conversation this year around how we want to manage that first and last mile. Talked about possible park and ride from here. All those sorts of ideas have been floating, and we've kind of created that. But I think that kind of language in here kind of gives us even more, and staff and the city more of a more runway to go out and to actually do it in future years.
Mr. Johansson?
Yeah, that brings up a point. Earlier in the year, we were discussing the charter, the proposed charter, and at that point, our discussion was really, are these items better on a general plan, are they better in a charter? So one of those is just the whole concept of risk-taking, reasonable risk-taking, agile development, some of the things that staff I know have been doing. How would, if someone's using this as a general plan, if someone's looking at developing a business or something in West Sacramento, they're going to look at this general plan, they're going to see kind of a feel of what the city's about. How would we, is this the appropriate place to incorporate something like that? Kind of the attitude on how we approach things.
I think it certainly could be. The temptation is always to get more specific than what a general plan may want, given that it's difficult to, well, not difficult, but somewhat laborious to amend if we're too specific in there and want to change our goal. So we would encourage to remain general, but provide foundational policy statements in there, if those would be helpful, in that regard.
Yeah, because I think there's going to be some preambles to this and some just general statements of where the city's at. Maybe that would be the place to look at this. So at least people get an idea of kind of the things that we're looking for, or at least we'd like to look for.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I mean, we did say that in the charter, and that we would try to port a lot of those key concepts, and frankly, more than in a preamble form. We said the general plan is the right place for those, and that was right. And because the general plan was a long-term plan, it was hard to change, but it wasn't impossible to change. It didn't know how to vote of the people and all of that. And so, it would, maybe we can ask staff to go back to those documents that Mr. Robinson and the city manager had prepared that got down to the essentials. Not you know, those covered a whole thousands and thousands of different topics and issues, but we got down to a set of you know, kind of key essentials, and much of what Mr. Johannesson, as well as the autonomous vehicles and others that have already come up, were in that set, and in terms of trying to reflect them. Because it should reflect, like, what is, I mean, a good chunk of the general plan from before and new one is, if you redacted it, I wouldn't necessarily, I wouldn't know you were talking about West Sacramento. I mean, some of the distinctiveness about us is lost because it is so general in terms of, walkability, complete streets, whatever, the stuff that now everybody's doing. And so I think trying to incorporate some of those elements that we said, what makes us successful and what are the core principles that guide our policy and our vision? Well, if that's not in the general plan, I don't know what should be. So I thought it was a great point. Anything else on mobility? Is bike share in here anywhere? It didn't jump out at me in the bike section, but.
I believe we did have a bike share in here, regional bicycle system coordination, and we had the bike and ped plan, appropriate bikeways. We probably want to put bike, that actual direct term bike share in here, since that has been something we have been working on.
Yeah, so I would definitely encourage that, because it's both because it's a project, but also because the point of bike share is to shape development and shape activity and shape mobility. The other policy that may or may not be reflected here, but that again didn't jump out at me, was the low stress bike routes policy that's now guiding what priorities we're setting about where new bike facilities and lanes and everything are going to go. That's not an obvious policy, but that's a general plan level policy lens on how we're approaching cycling, which is to make it possible for people, rather than focusing on making more and more better bike lanes on Jefferson, is to create more alternatives that are safer in all respects. And so just as an example of the low stress approach that we moved to in the last 2 years. All right, public facilities and, can I just, one more mobility? If you would take a look at M 8.3, in light of the earlier conversation about the Transportation Management Association, I think we're photocopying that policy from before, but we ought to take a clear-eyed look at whether or not we ought to be insisting on that and forcing people to join and all of that, whether that's really an effective way to meet their needs or ours. But anyway, public facilities and services.
Can I go back to that?
Oh yeah, sorry.
And it just occurred to me, and on the mobility piece, on the parking. We had some discussions around that today, and that there were new technologies in parking, and in fact, we had discussions around how we might even look at some of the parking, because of the urban core, how we might share some of that technology or leverage that with the city of Sacramento, because they've invested so much into it. So I'm not sure how we articulate that sort of piece into the goal. And I know that's kind of, we talked about that generally this morning, but again, if this is, I think if we can incorporate some of that thought into this goal about using new technology, because it's rapidly deploying and being developed, something we may want to think about here.
Yeah. Okay. Public facilities and services element. Twice, going 3 times, gone. Parks and Recreation element. Moving on to Natural and Cultural Resources element. Going to Safety element. Mr. Christoph.
In some respects, there's really sort of a combination in some respects to natural and cultural resources and safety element. And what I'm referring to is going to be the potential floodplain along the new levee that's being constructed in Southport. it is being looked at very seriously as far as allowing the water from the river as it rises to go into the setback levee area. And thus, it's creating the cultural and natural resources element in some respects, but it's also part of a trail. And then it becomes part of public safety. So I don't know how you want to include all of that, but I think it is going to be a very important element that the city of West Sacramento has. It will be our American River Trail, so to speak. And so, I mean, I think that there will be an awful lot of use along that new trail that is created by the setback levees. So I don't know how you incorporate all of that, but at the same time, I thought that there would be a connection between all three of those: safety, natural and cultural resources, and a recreation element. So I don't know what you do with it, but I mean, at the same time, I think that is going to be an asset that the city of West Sacramento is going to have in not too distant future, fairly short period of time.
And there is one policy in the safety element, 2.20, that tries to address any multi-purpose benefits that some of the flood control projects can have in terms of recreation and, cultural value, and while still obviously providing, safety, as a
Okay.
primary goal.
Okay.
All right, any other questions or comments on the safety element? Or on any other portions of the document that we haven't already covered or that we wanted to get back to? Mr. Johannesson?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just on the healthy
sorry,
community
yes, the health, yeah.
element. So we are a HEAL city, healthy eating, active living city, and I know that they have a general plan toolkit. I haven't compared that with what you have in here, but it may be something to reach out to that organization, just see, because it's going to include not only things from healthy communities element, but also mobility and land use and some of the others. So they may have some checklists of what, at least what they consider to be essential elements in a general plan for those issues.
Mr. Ledesma?
Thank you. I do want to go back to the public facilities and services element. I knew there was an element I forgot. In the law enforcement crime prevention area, or maybe it's how we can find the policy areas that we've been doing a lot of work, some great work this year with our police department, talking about 21st century policing, use of technology for data, and how we can have reporting and data more available for our residents. And it's just something that we need to make sure we articulate some of those endeavors into the section. While this covers their outreach to the community, while it covers communication with the community, I think something in me says we need to be provide, like I said, a little more runway or path as a goal that we want to achieve, and that is how we want to maybe have our continue the work we've done this year around our working with our police force, find better reporting. They're going to have to get to it anyway for some of the requirements that are coming their way. But again, they're going to be looking for grants for technology to support it all. I just want to make sure we find a way. I don't have the right wording for it, the police chief might have some input there, but it is a value I think we've articulated this year, how we want to interact with the police force. And we've had a great police force that has actually been very willing and open about what they've been doing and how we go about this. But again, how do we get in the path? How to articulate that in here is something I'd like to see.
Yeah, I 100% agree on both the 21st century policing and the the data transparency and the use of data for, for management and accountability and all those purposes, are those are general plan level policy commitments that we ought to be making. And they're at least as important as us committing to fund specific, very specific discrete programs like the GREAT program or the environmental design program. Those are good things too. But the 21st century policing is an actual, major policy lens framework on how we conduct the department conducts itself, and how the civilian side of the city government conducts itself as well. And so it ought to be I think I agree completely. It ought to be reflected in the general plan, in at least a basic way. Any other comments on any part of the document, Mayor Pro Tem Sandy?
Oh, I'm sorry. In the healthy communities element, I'm just not sure, have we had a food policy council? It mentions it, and so I didn't know, it seemed like it pulled that out kind of as a separate idea. Do we have that? We want to have that, or, I just hadn't heard of it, so I don't know where that came from. If someone had made a recommendation for us to do that. Maybe it's historical from before. So that was one, just a question there. And then the HC 3.13, the support for community gardens, it's under there that mentions urban farms, and I didn't know if.
Let's flip it.
My suggestion was support for urban farms, or somehow signaling that, because that has been so important to us, and I think it will continue to be. So just pulling it out and giving it a bit more emphasis.
Agreed. Yeah, we don't have a food policy council now. I mean, there are a lot of these very, very discrete things that don't feel like general plan commitments throughout the document. And I know many of them are there because, the state housing element law requires this thing, or if you want to qualify for grants for the SNAP program, then you have to have a food policy council. So I know that there are reasons for many of them, but, as you're taking one last look through this document, I think, identifying things that are unnecessary general plan dust, that are committing us to actions and activities and funding programs and whatever they don't define what we're doing as a 20-year strategy. They're just, they might have made sense back when we didn't have that many initiatives. We have so many initiatives and so many programs now that the general plan shouldn't, as you said, David, it's so hard to amend it. We shouldn't be committing ourselves to stuff that we don't really believe in as being fundamental to the direction that we were laid out in the rest of those sections of the document. So that might be one of them. That might be something that you need to have in order to qualify for some funding source, in which case, by all means, keep it in. But let's try. I think it's a good point. We ought to prune out a lot of the programmatic and commitments that we make in the general plan. That some programs that we don't even know whether we have anymore or ever did. So. Anything else? All right. You have sufficient feedback, Mr. Tilley?
Yes, thank you very much. This will help us, and combined with what we got from the Planning Commission last week, to keep this moving forward. So thank you.
All right. Good luck with your timeline. All right. That brings us to council calendar. Ms. Berlin?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. Here are some dates of some events that are coming up that it might be of interest to you. Tomorrow, the Innovate Your State Civic and GovTech Showcase is happening at the Crest Theater, starting at 9:30. And I believe Councilmember Johannesson is going to be speaking there about the STIR program. So that should be really interesting. On Friday, the 23rd will be the latest off the grid at the barn. Then on the 24th, there's a couple of events that are concurrent. One is at the Riverwalk Park, and it is a half-day party concert event. So it's a bunch of DJs and bands and some big party apparently. And then also, on the 24th is our McBridge Fest, and that will be at on the Mike McGowan Bridge with food trucks and music and activities for the kids, so that should be a lot of fun. On Sunday, the 25th, is the Tower Bridge Dinner, and that's, the bridge opens up at 4:30 for drinks and appetizers, and I think a couple of council members are attending that. On Sunday, the 25th, we've got Off the Grid at Riverwalk Park. Then moving to.
Wait, you're still only on this week.
I know.
What are the highlights? The real highlights?
Okay, I'm done with this week. Next Thursday is the YOLO Leaders Forum in Woodland. Then moving on to October 14th is the Village Parkway opening. That's Friday at 10 a.m. Then we've got the West Sacramento Fire Department open house at Station 45 on October 15th. And Bill Christoph's retirement party on October 17th, and invites will be going out. Some invites have already gone out, and the rest of the invites should go out this week.
All right, any questions on the calendar? City manager report?
I'll try to stick to the big highlights. The word of bill was approved by the Senate last week, as we highlighted in the newsletter, on a 95-3 vote, includes West Sacramento's chief report. Huge milestone. Now it goes to the House, so when they come back in November, that will come up, and we'll keep you posted, obviously. We are working with Congresswoman Matsui's office on Flood Awareness Week. That's October 24th, and we're going to try to come up with a date that works for the Congresswoman, talk about flood awareness, but also about the West Sacramento Levee Project as well, and the progress there. I also want to mention, we have staff is working on a motel inspection task force. We inspect the motels throughout the city annually. This year, we're doing it more concerted. We started last week with code enforcement leading the effort with fire there. Our homeless coordinator's there as well. We're also doing a TOT audit. We'll complete all of the inspections by mid-November. One of the key items that we're getting is that in addition to the code enforcement inspections, we're asking the guests of those motels to complete a questionnaire. And we're learning a lot about actually who lives in the motels, some longer term than maybe that we are aware of, and where they're coming from. So early December, we should have a summary, roll that information up with some new information, I think, in terms of who is staying in these motels, particularly on West Capitol Avenue. And Mayor Pro Tem Sandine mentioned the Minneapolis trip. On Friday, I'm going to International City Managers Association meeting, and really focused on the sessions on smart city initiatives there, as well as urban farming. They've got done some interesting things in the Kansas City area around urban farming, so I'm going to take a couple tours there and be back late Tuesday afternoon.
All right, questions for the city manager report? City attorney report? Staff direction from members of the council? We have no future agenda item requests, so Mr. Johannesson moves and Mr. Ledesma seconds, so Mr. Christoph seconds, that meeting be adjourned. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.